He built a mountain to be buried in, a cone of stone rising out of the desert south of Jerusalem, an artificial peak crowned with a palace, a monument to himself so vast that travelers could see it for miles. He was the most powerful king the Holy Land had known in centuries, a builder whose works still stand today, and a tyrant so consumed by paranoia that he murdered his own wife and 3 of his own sons. And when he died, he was laid to rest inside that mountain he had raised. Then, for 2,000 years, no one could find him. Archaeologists searched the site for more than 3 decades, and when a team finally announced in 2007 that they had discovered the tomb of Herod the Great, the story did not end there. Because the tomb held no body, it held a magnificent coffin smashed deliberately into hundreds of pieces. And other scholars stood up and said, the tomb was not even his. Let me take you through what archaeologists actually found inside Herod's mountain, because the truth is a genuine mystery, and it is stranger than the clean discovery the headlines promised. My name is Julian Ng, and I follow the physical evidence, the tombs, the bones, the inscriptions, to sort what we truly know about the famous dead from what we merely wish we knew. Herod the Great is one of the most compelling cases there is, because almost everything about him sits on that knife edge between certainty and doubt. We know he existed, we know he built on a colossal scale, we can stand inside his works today, and yet his most personal remains, his tomb, his body, his very bones, dissolve into question marks the moment you reach for them. Herod came to power in a violent, unstable age, installed as king of Judea by the Romans in the year 37 before the Common Era, and from the very start, his own subjects saw him as an outsider. Herod was not of Israelite descent. His family were Idumaeans, from Idumea, the land the Hebrew Bible calls Edom, a neighboring people traditionally traced back to Esau, the brother of Jacob. The Idumaeans had been forcibly converted to Judaism only a generation or 2 before Herod's birth. So Herod practiced the Jewish faith, but in the eyes of many of his subjects, he was a half-Jew, a foreigner, a man of Edomite and Arab blood placed over them by a foreign empire. That resentment shadowed his entire reign, and it matters for our story because it helps explain the fury that would later be visited on his tomb. Whatever his subjects thought of his lineage, Herod was without question one of the greatest builders of the ancient world. He rebuilt and vastly expanded the Second Temple in Jerusalem, raising the enormous platform of the Temple Mount, whose western retaining wall still stands today as the holiest site in Judaism, the Western Wall. That is Herod's engineering, still standing, still prayed at, 2,000 years on. He built the great harbor city of Caesarea on the coast, with an artificial port that was a marvel of engineering. He fortified the mountaintop of Masada with luxury palaces, and he raised the Herodium, the desert monument that would become his tomb. As a builder, Herod earned his title. The great was not entirely flattery. The Herodium itself deserves a moment because it tells you everything about the man. It was not a natural hill. Herod took an existing modest rise in the desert and had it heightened and shaped by hand, piling up earth and stone until it became a smooth artificial cone, a man-made mountain visible from Jerusalem itself. On top, he set a lavish palace fortress, ringed by massive circular towers, with a grand staircase climbing the slope. At the base, he built an entire lower complex, a palace, a huge pool, gardens, bathhouses, all in the middle of an arid landscape, fed by an aqueduct. And he did something almost no other builder does. He named it after himself, the Herodium. It was the only site that bore his own name, and he intended it to be his eternal monument and his grave. This was a man building his own legend in stone, on a scale meant to outlast empires. Keep that ambition in mind, because it makes what eventually happened to his tomb all the more striking. But the same man was, in his private life, a monster. And this is thoroughly documented, not legend. Herod was consumed by suspicion, terrified that those closest to him were plotting to take his throne. He had married a Hasmonean princess named Mariamne, a woman of the old royal line, and by the accounts we have, he loved her intensely. And he had her executed anyway, convinced she had betrayed him. He killed her grandfather, and her brother, and eventually her mother. And most chilling of all, he executed 3 of his own sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, the children of Mariamne, and later his eldest son Antipater, put to death just days before Herod's own death. The Roman Emperor Augustus is said to have joked, grimly, that it was safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son, a pun that worked in Greek and a comment on the fact that Herod, observing Jewish law, would not eat pork, so his pigs at least were safe. This is the real historical Herod, not a myth. A brilliant, building, murdering paranoiac. Most people, though, know Herod from a single New Testament story, the massacre of the innocents in the Gospel of Matthew, in which Herod, hearing of the birth of a rival king in Bethlehem, orders the killing of all the infant boys there. And here I have to be careful and honest, as this channel always tries to be. There is no independent historical or archaeological evidence for the massacre of the innocents. It appears only in Matthew, and not in Josephus, our detailed source for Herod's reign, who recorded plenty of his other atrocities, and would have had no reason to omit this one. Most historians regard the massacre as likely unhistorical, a theological narrative rather than a recorded event. What is true is that it fit Herod's reputation so perfectly that people believed it instantly, because a man who murdered his own sons out of fear for his throne was exactly the kind of man who could be imagined ordering such a thing. The story is probably not literal history, but it captured a real truth about the terror of his rule. Now to his death, which is itself one of the strange forensic puzzles of the ancient world. Around the year 4 before the Common Era, at roughly 70 years old, Herod fell gravely ill, and our source Josephus describes the symptoms in vivid, horrible detail. A fever, an unbearable itching over his whole body, intense pains in his intestines, swollen dropsical feet, such difficulty breathing that he could only breathe sitting upright, and a putrefaction, a gangrene, of his genitals that, in Josephus's words, produced worms. It was a grotesque and agonizing decline, and it has fascinated doctors ever since. Modern physicians have pored over that description and proposed diagnoses: chronic kidney failure, a gangrenous complication, even a parasitic infection from a waterborne worm common in the region. But I have to be honest about the limits here. Josephus wrote roughly a century after Herod died. We have no body, no tissue, no bones to examine. Every modern diagnosis is an educated guess built on an ancient text, not a forensic finding. We can say the sources describe a horrifying death, and that doctors have plausible theories about its cause. We cannot say we know what killed him, because the one thing that could tell us, his remains, is exactly what has gone missing. There is one last detail about his death that captures the man completely. According to Josephus, Herod knew, with total clarity, that his people would not mourn him. He knew they hated him, and so, on his deathbed, he devised a final act of monstrous vanity. He ordered that a group of the most distinguished men of Judea be rounded up and held, and that at the moment of his death they be executed, so that the whole land would be plunged into genuine grief, and there would be weeping across the kingdom, whether the people mourned Herod or not. He wanted tears at his funeral, and if he could not earn them, he would manufacture them through murder. The order, mercifully, was never carried out. His heirs released the prisoners. But think about what that command reveals. Here was a man so certain of being unloved that he tried to buy mourning with the lives of others, and that same craving, to be remembered, to be grieved, to not simply vanish, is exactly what drove him to build his mountain tomb in the first place. Hold on to that, because the fate of that tomb is the final, brutal irony of his story, which brings us, at last, to the tomb, and to the search that consumed a lifetime. Herod had built the Herodium as his intended burial place, and the ancient historian Josephus confirms that Herod was buried there. But Josephus never said exactly where within the sprawling complex, and for centuries the precise location was lost. In 1972, an Israeli archaeologist named Ehud Netzer began excavating the Herodium, and over the following decades, the search for Herod's tomb became the central quest of his career. For a long time, everyone assumed the tomb would be found at the base of the mountain in the lower complex, and they dug there for years and found nothing. Then came the breakthrough. In 2007, after 35 years of searching, Netzer's team shifted their attention to the northeastern slope of the mountain partway up. And there they found it, the remains of a mausoleum, and scattered around it, the shattered fragments of an extraordinary sarcophagus. This was no ordinary coffin. It was made of a beautiful reddish, pinkish limestone, elaborately carved with decorative rosettes, around 2.5 meters long, clearly the resting place of someone of the very highest status. Nearby lay 2 other, plainer, white limestone sarcophagi, most likely belonging to members of Herod's family. Netzer announced to the world that he had found the tomb of Herod the Great. After a lifetime of searching, he was certain. The location, the grandeur, the red royal stone, and the testimony of Josephus, he said, left no doubt. But the doubt came anyway, and this is where the clean story falls apart, and the real mystery begins. Consider first what was inside that magnificent sarcophagus. Nothing. It was empty. And it was not simply empty, it had been deliberately smashed, broken into hundreds of pieces, an act of violent desecration. The most likely explanation is grim and fitting. Decades after Herod's death, during the first Jewish revolt against Rome, from the year 66 onward, Jewish rebels occupied the Herodium and used it as a stronghold. And those rebels loathed Herod, the Roman-appointed foreign king who had lorded over their people. It appears they took their hatred out on his tomb, shattering the coffin of the hated king and scattering or destroying whatever it held. So the very resentment that shadowed Herod in life, his outsider status, his cruelty, seems to have followed him into death and torn his tomb apart. If those bones were ever there, the rebels made sure nothing survived to be found. And then came the scholarly challenge. Netzer was certain, but not everyone agreed. After his announcement, other respected archaeologists, including his own Hebrew University colleagues Joseph Patrish and Benjamin Arubas, publicly disputed the identification. Their argument was pointed. Herod was a man of monumental ego, who built on a titanic scale the Temple Mount, Caesarea Masada. Would such a man, they asked, really have chosen so relatively modest a mausoleum on a slope for his final monument? They suggested Herod's true tomb might lie elsewhere at the Herodium, perhaps still undiscovered, and that the structure Netzer found, however grand, might belong to someone else. The debate has never been fully settled, and there is a genuinely tragic coda to the whole story. In 2010, Ehud Netzer, the man who had devoted his life to finding Herod's tomb, fell at the Herodium, at the very site of his greatest discovery, and died of his injuries. He went to his grave certain he had found Herod. Others remained certain he had not. So let me be clear about what we actually have, because this is the honest heart of it. We have a magnificent royal mausoleum at the place Herod built to be buried. We have the shattered fragments of a king's red sarcophagus, deliberately destroyed by people who hated him. We have a compelling lifetime argument from the archaeologist who found it that this was Herod. And we have serious, unresolved scholarly doubt, no inscription bearing his name, and above all, no body. The tomb of Herod the Great is not a solved case. It is a beautiful, broken, empty question. And that empty coffin is also why there is a limit I have to respect, because people always ask, what does his DNA say? The honest answer is that we do not have Herod's DNA, and we cannot, because we do not have his body. There are no confirmed remains of Herod the Great to test. Anyone who claims to have sequenced the genome of Herod is inventing it. What we do have is the documented history of his ancestry, and that tells a quieter but real story. Herod's Idumaean, Edomite forebears, and his Nabatean Arab mother were not some alien people from far away. The Edomites, the Nabateans, and the Israelites were all closely related Semitic peoples of the ancient Near East, neighboring branches of the same deep Levantine population as the genetics of the ancient region increasingly shows. Herod's foreignness, the thing his subjects never forgave, was a matter of recent history and religion and politics, of whose ancestors had converted when, not of any deep gulf of blood. At the level of the genome, the hated foreign king and the people he ruled sprang from the same ancient root. The division that defined his life was, in the longest view, a division within a family. I have written about exactly this kind of case, where a famous tomb turns out to be a question rather than an answer, and where the truth is more layered than the headline in my book, Secrets of the Gods, which weighs history's great discoveries against what the evidence can really support. Herod's tomb is one of the finest examples I know of the difference between finding a magnificent thing and proving whose it is. Let me leave you with the irony at the center of it all, because it is almost too perfect. Herod the Great spent his life terrified of being forgotten, of being unmourned, of vanishing. He raised an entire mountain so that his tomb would endure forever. He rebuilt the temple, he built cities, he carved his name into the land on a scale almost no one in history has matched. And in the end, his body disappeared, his coffin was smashed by people who despised him. His tomb became a riddle that scholars still argue over. The greatest builder of the ancient world could not, in the end, secure the one structure he cared about most, his own grave. The mountain still stands exactly where he raised it, but the king it was built to hold is gone, scattered, unconfirmed, and silent, leaving us with a monument to a man we cannot quite find inside it. Sometimes the most powerful thing the past can tell us is that even the mightiest could not command what became of them. Herod built to be remembered forever. What endured was the mystery of where he went. If you want more investigations where a famous grave turns out to guard a deeper question than the one we came to ask, stay with me. The dead do not always stay where we put them, and the truth is often waiting exactly where the certainty runs out.